His eyes found mine across the ballroom, and in that instant, I knew my world was about to shatter. The torn fabric of my dress hung like a banner of shame, but his gaze held something else entirely. Recognition, fury, and a truth that would destroy us all. The whispers died. The laughter ceased. And then he spoke the words that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. Their laughter still echoes in the cold walls of the court, like a sound that never fades. I remember the exact moment when I stopped being just a shadow in the palace corridors and became the target of collective mockery. It was a night of celebration. The entire hall gleamed under golden candles, and the eyes surrounding me reflected the same false brilliance of glasses raised for convenience. I was the princess without a throne, the omega that fate had placed in the wrong spot, trying to disguise the trembling of my hands as I held the crystal goblet. I knew that the slightest hesitation would give them reason to mock me again. And they did. They said I was the mistake of blood that should never have mixed, that my presence was a piteous concession from the queen, a living reminder of an ancient sin. I grew up hearing that I should be grateful for the roof, the food, and the tolerance. But no one mentioned what it cost to exist in that place, the price of breathing the same air as the legitimate heirs. The palace had been my prison for 18 years. Every morning, I would wake in the servants' quarters, dress in mended clothes that marked my status, and try to make myself invisible. The other servants pitied me, the bastard daughter who lived between worlds, neither noble nor truly common. Lady Cordelia, the Queen's niece, took particular pleasure in reminding me of my place. She would smile sweetly before delivering her cruelest cuts, her voice honey-sweet with poison. How fortunate you are to be allowed to observe such elegance. Perhaps one day you'll learn to carry yourself with even a fraction of noble grace. I had learned not to flinch, not to let them see how their words carved pieces from my soul. But inside I burned with fury I dared not show. That night was different. The celebration was for Prince Damien's return from the Northern Territories, and the entire court had gathered in their finest attire. I had been given a dress, if it could be called that. The fabric was old, hastily altered, and I could feel the loose stitches threatening to give way. As I entered the ballroom, I felt the familiar weight of stairs. The musicians played a haunting melody, and couples swirled across the marble floor. I stood at the edge, an unwelcome observer. "Look," I heard Lady Cordelia whisper. "The little foundling is trying to dress like one of us again." For just a moment, I stood straighter, lifted my chin, and met their gazes directly. That was my mistake. Lady Cordelia approached with predatory grace. Her fingers reached out to touch my dress. Such interesting needlework. "Tell me, did you stitch this yourself in the servants' quarters?" Before I could answer, her nail caught the loose thread at my shoulder. She pulled, and the fabric gave way with a terrible ripping sound. The makeshift patches beneath were revealed, rough, uneven stitches that had tried to hold together cloth that had seen too many years. The laughter started as a ripple and grew into a wave. I stood there, exposed and humiliated, feeling as though my soul had been laid bare for their entertainment. The torn fabric hung from my shoulder like a flag of surrender. But then, something changed. The laughter died abruptly, as if someone had drawn a blade across sound itself. A heavy silence descended, the kind that makes hearts stumble. I could feel it before I saw him, like the pressure before a storm. The very air seemed to thicken. The king had entered. He didn't need to speak to dominate the scene. The weight of his presence was enough. Tall and immobile, his eyes swept the room until they found me. And when they did, I felt as if everything else had vanished into shadow. King Aldrich Ravencrest was not a man easily forgotten. At 42, he carried himself with the lethal grace of a predator who had never known defeat. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, framed a face carved from marble and shadow. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as dangerous, silver blue like winter storms, capable of freezing blood or setting souls ablaze. The ladies fell silent. The princes stepped back. He approached me with deliberate steps, the echo of his boots marking the marble floor. When he stopped before me, I could feel the heat emanating from his skin, smell the dense perfume of sandalwood and something untamed. Who dared to laugh at the daughter of my blood? His voice echoed like contained thunder. The entire hall trembled. Those words, so impossible yet so sacred, cut through air and time. I, his daughter? For a moment I thought it was another mockery, but he didn't laugh. Not a single muscle in his face moved beyond the fury trembling in his jaw. The murmur spread like wildfire. Daughter? Impossible. A lie. The king raised his hand and silence fell again, suffocating. There are secrets that time does not destroy, he said, his voice marked by ancient weariness. This young woman carries the royal blood that many preferred to erase. The queen, pale as moonlight, lowered her gaze. The lady stepped back, confused. One counsellor whispered something, but the king silenced him with a single gesture. I still couldn't breathe. The revelation struck like lightning. I was what they most feared. I, the rejected one, was heir to a throne denied before my birth. He touched the torn fabric of my dress, his gesture slow and respectful, almost like a plea for forgiveness. Never again, he said, low but audible to all. Never again will I allow them to mock you. In that instant, the entire ballroom bowed. Not for me, but for him. And yet something in me rose. For the first time, I looked at them without lowering my head. I was no longer the servant disguised as a princess. I was the broken mirror in which they would see their own hypocrisy reflected. From that night forward, everything changed. What had once been whispers of contempt became murmurs of fear. The gazes that used to burn now shifted away. I felt his presence constantly, in corridors where the air carried his scent, in shadows that moved differently when he was near. I didn't know if what united us was blood or destiny, but there was something more, an invisible thread that had bound our existence since before I knew his name. Sometimes I think he always knew who I was, others that he discovered and hated himself for it. Today, when I walk the same corridors I once avoided, I still hear distant echoes of the laughter that wounded me, but they no longer reach me. Each step is a reminder that even the despised can carry an inheritance the world tries to deny. Though I fear what's coming, there's a certainty that guides me. The king's gaze still pursues me, and with it, the premonition that this story is just beginning. 3 weeks after the revelation, I was summoned to his private study. The room was magnificent and intimidating, filled with ancient books and artifacts from distant lands. Tapestries depicting the Ravencrest dynasty lined the walls, faces of kings and queens who shared the blood now running through my veins. He stood with his back to me, looking out at gardens where autumn painted leaves in shades of fire. When he finally turned, I saw something that took my breath away. Uncertainty. The mighty king was uncertain about how to speak to the daughter he had hidden. "Do you hate me?" The question fell like a stone into still water. I considered lying, offering reassurance that would ease the guilt in his eyes. But surrounded by the weight of his legacy, I found I couldn't give him anything but truth. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what I feel about anything anymore." He nodded, moving to a cabinet and withdrawing a small, ornate box. Inside lay a locket, delicate and beautiful, crafted from silver and set with a sapphire that held starlight. "This belonged to your mother," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Her name was Lyanna Ashworth. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen and the kindest. My breath caught. For so long my mother had been nothing more than a story. But here was proof she had been real, loved, worthy of a king's affection. "What happened to her?" His face darkened with old pain. "Political necessity. I was young, barely 22, and my advisors convinced me that marrying Queen Isabella would secure crucial alliances. They said my feelings for Lyanna were youthful infatuation." He closed his eyes. "I believed them and sent her away. But she was already carrying your child. She was carrying you. She never told me. I only learned when she died and her sister brought you to the palace. By then I was married, and Isabella had made it clear there would be consequences if I acknowledged you publicly. She threatened you. She threatened you." Isabella knew that having you killed would make me her enemy forever, but she could ensure you lived in obscurity, a reminder of my past mistakes but not a threat to her children's inheritance. Why now? Why reveal the truth after all these years? Because I watched them humiliate you, and I couldn't bear it anymore. Because you're my daughter and you deserve better. Because I'm getting older, and the thought of dying with you, never knowing who you truly are, became unbearable. The locket lay heavy in my palm. When I looked up at him, I saw my own eyes reflected in his face, the same silver blue that had always made me feel different. What happens now? Now you must be very careful. Acknowledging you has made you powerful, but also a target. The game of courts is played with smiles and poisoned wine. His words awakened something I hadn't known existed, a hunger for the power that was rightfully mine, for respect that had been denied. Will you teach me? The smile that crossed his face was fierce and proud. My daughter, I will teach you how to rule it. The training began the next morning in rooms far from prying eyes. King Aldrich didn't simply want to teach me politics. He wanted to forge me into someone who could survive the deadly games of court. Power is not about being strongest or loudest, he told me. It's about understanding what others want and being able to give it or withhold it at will. Everyone in this court has desires, fears, ambitions, and weaknesses. He taught me to observe subtle signals, the way Lady Cordelia's eye would twitch before a cruel insult, how the Queen's fingers drummed when planning something dangerous, the tells that revealed when someone was lying or afraid. But the most challenging part wasn't learning to read others. It was learning to control myself. Years of suppressing emotions had to be unlearned. He taught me how to project authority without arrogance, how to command respect without demanding it. You have been taught to make yourself small, he said. But you are a Ravencrest. We do not diminish ourselves for others' comfort. Stand taller. Look at me as if you expect obedience, not as if you hope for tolerance. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. My voice grew stronger, my posture more confident. The servants began treating me differently, their deference becoming genuine. Even some minor nobles started seeking my attention. But with visibility came danger. Lady Cordelia's mockery transformed into something more calculated. Invitations would arrive after events had passed. Servants brought cold meals or damaged clothing. My belongings would disappear, only to be found in embarrassing locations. The Queen's strategy was different but equally dangerous. She used her influence to isolate me through seemingly innocent means, always framing her attacks as concern while subtly reinforcing that I didn't belong. But the King's lessons had taught me patience and strategy. I began cultivating my own allies among the servants and lesser nobles, people who had their own reasons to resent the established order. The stable master passed over for promotion, the head cook whose daughter was denied marriage because of common blood, the captain of guards who earned position through merit rather than inheritance. The real test came during the harvest festival. I wore a dress of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread, a gift from the king. When I entered the ballroom, conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward me, but this time I met their gazes boldly. Lady Cordelia approached early, wearing elaborate rose silk. Lady Alara, how lovely you look. Though that dress seems rather ambitious for someone still learning noble fashion. How thoughtful of you to be concerned, Lady Cordelia. Though I'm surprised to hear you speak of fashion's intricacies, given how predictable your own choices have become. The words hit their mark. Her smile faltered before snapping back, but the damage was done. The other ladies had heard the subtle insult, seen their leader lose composure. The evening continued with small victories and careful maneuvers. I danced with young lords, spoke with ambassadors, demonstrating knowledge that impressed them. But the defining moment came when the king himself crossed the ballroom and extended his hand for a dance. As we moved through the intricate steps, he spoke quietly. You're learning quickly. But remember, tonight's victories are small ones. The real challenges are yet to come. I'm ready for them. I believe you are. But be careful who you trust. Today's ally can become tomorrow's enemy with frightening speed. His warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us expected. The morning after brought news that would shake my confidence. My maid Sarah approached with a face pale as winter moonlight. My lady, there's something you need to know. Last night, after the ball, Lady Cordelia held a meeting with several noble families. They're planning something against you. My blood chilled, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of planning? They're spreading rumours that your acknowledgement is part of some political scheme. They're saying foreign powers are using you to destabilise the kingdom. The accusation was clever and dangerous, playing on nobles' fears about foreign interference while questioning the king's judgment and my legitimacy. Who was at this meeting? Sarah hesitated. Lady Cordelia, Lord Pemberton, the Duke of Westmarch, and Prince Damien was there. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My half-brother, who had grown up with every privilege I'd been denied, was working against me. Any secret hope for familial acceptance died in that moment. Later that day, I encountered Prince Damien in the gardens. At 24, he was conventionally handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with golden hair and green eyes. But there was something weak about his jaw, something calculating about his smile. "Sister," he said mockingly, "how lovely to find you among the thorns. Quite fitting, don't you think?" I recognized the trap. He was trying to provoke me into saying something he could use against me. "Good morning, Prince Damien. I hope you enjoyed last night's festivities." "Oh, I did. Though I found some revelations quite surprising. Tell me, how does it feel to finally be acknowledged after so many years of obscurity?" "I feel grateful for His Majesty's wisdom and mercy, and I hope to prove worthy of his trust." Trust. Yes, that's quite important in these uncertain times. With so many threats to the kingdom, it becomes crucial to know where everyone's loyalties truly lie. There it was. The insinuation Sarah had warned me about. Indeed. I imagine that's why His Majesty values those who have proven themselves through faithful service over those who offer pretty words but little substance. His eyes flashed with anger. "Careful, sister. You may have father's acknowledgement, but you're still navigating treacherous waters. It would be unfortunate if you were to find yourself in over your head." The threat was clear, though ambiguously delivered. "How thoughtful of you to worry. But I've learned to be quite an accomplished swimmer. The deepest waters often hide the most precious treasures." I walked away knowing that whatever hope I'd harboured for familial acceptance was dead. But the conversation had revealed something valuable. They were moving against me quickly. I needed allies fast. The solution came as I reached the palace entrance where knights gathered around Captain Marcus Thorne, a man who had earned his position through merit rather than birth. He understood what it meant to be judged by others' assumptions rather than one's own actions. That afternoon, I requested a private audience with him. "Captain, I need your help, and in return, I can offer you something no one else in this palace can." "And what might that be, my lady?" "A chance to serve a ruler who values capability over bloodline, who judges people by their actions rather than their ancestry." After studying me in silence, a smile spread across his weathered face. "What did you have in mind?" "Through Captain Thorne, I gained access to a network of palace staff and minor nobles who existed on power's periphery. People with skills and ambition, but without the bloodlines necessary to advance. They were hungry for opportunity. Within a fortnight, I had my own intelligence network. The seamstress who heard noble ladies gossiping. The stable master who knew which lords made suspicious late-night rides. The kitchen maids who overheard private conversations. Information flowed to me like water finding its level. What I learned was both fascinating and terrifying. The kingdom was more unstable than most realised. King Aldrich's reign had been long and prosperous, but he was ageing, and succession loomed larger with each passing year. Prince Damien was the obvious heir, but he lacked the intelligence and strength necessary to hold the throne. My existence complicated calculations in ways that made many people nervous. As an acknowledged royal daughter, I had a legitimate claim if something happened to Damien. More dangerous still, I was an unknown quantity, someone who couldn't be easily predicted or controlled. But the most shocking revelation came from Master Aldwin, the palace's chief scribe. He approached me one evening as I was leaving the library, glancing around nervously before pulling me into an alcove. "My lady, There are things about your birth that you need to know. Things that go beyond what His Majesty has told you. He withdrew a roll of parchment, its edges yellowed with age. Your mother's marriage certificate. She and the king were legally wed in a ceremony witnessed by 3 church members. The marriage was annulled later, but according to royal law, the annulment doesn't affect the legitimacy of children conceived during the legal marriage. You're not just the king's acknowledged bastard daughter. You're his legitimate heir, with a claim that supersedes even Prince Damien's. The words hit like lightning, illuminating everything with terrible clarity. No wonder the Queen had worked so hard to keep me hidden. They weren't just trying to eliminate a potential rival. They were trying to remove the rightful heir. Why are you telling me this? Because others know this truth, and they won't hesitate to use it against you. Lord Pemberton has been searching through old records. He hasn't found this document yet, but it's only a matter of time. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The legitimate heir to the throne. There could be no going back now, no retreating into obscurity. I was trapped in the Game of Thrones whether I wanted to be or not. The next morning brought a summons that made my blood run cold. Queen Isabella requested my presence in her private solar for a friendly conversation between family members. I dressed carefully, choosing deep burgundy that made my hair appear more golden and my eyes more intense. The document was hidden in a secret pocket close to my heart. The Queen's solar was decorated in shades of cream and gold that emphasized her pale beauty while making everything else seem drab. She sat positioned to catch morning light perfectly, wearing ivory silk that made her look ethereal. The effect was clearly calculated to intimidate. "Ilara, my dear, how lovely to see you thriving. Though I confess I worry about you. The transition from servant to nobility can be overwhelming for someone without proper preparation. Your Majesty is very kind to be concerned, though I find that challenges often bring out strengths we didn't know we possessed." Her smile sharpened. How true, though sometimes those strengths can lead us into dangerous territory. "Tell me, have you given thought to your future? Marriage, perhaps?" The trap was elegant, offering to find me a husband would solve the problem of my claim by making me someone else's responsibility while implying that my unique background made me unsuitable for the highest levels of nobility. I'm honoured by your Majesty's interest, though I confess I haven't given much thought to marriage yet. I find myself quite occupied with learning my new role and discovering more about my family history. Her eyes flashed with something that might have been fear. Family history can be fascinating, though sometimes the past is better left undisturbed. Old wounds, forgotten shames, such things can be painful when brought back into the light. On the contrary, I find that truth has a way of illuminating everything it touches. Hidden things lose their power once they're exposed to daylight. We stared at each other across the small table, 2 women who understood exactly what the other was saying without speaking the words aloud. "I hope you'll be very careful, my dear. The palace can be dangerous for those who don't understand the rules. It would be tragic if something were to happen to you just as you're beginning to find your place in the world. I appreciate your Majesty's concern, and I promise to be very, very careful about everything." As I walked back to my chambers, I felt the weight of eyes watching from every shadow. The game had escalated to a level where the stakes were life and death. That evening, I met with Captain Thorne and Master Aldwyn in secret, sharing what I had learned and beginning to plan for the storm that was surely coming. If the Queen wanted to play dangerous games, she would discover that the bastard daughter she had tried to suppress had learned some very dangerous skills indeed. The weeks following my confrontation with Queen Isabella passed in careful manoeuvring and growing tension. Every conversation felt like a chess match, every smile carried potential betrayal, and every shadow might hide an assassin. The palace had become a battlefield where weapons were words and casualties were reputations. My network of allies continued growing, drawn by genuine loyalty and calculated self-interest. Displaced nobles saw a chance to rise based on merit. Servants who had been treated as invisible finally had someone who acknowledged their worth. Even some younger established nobles began gravitating toward me, attracted by promises of change. But with every ally gained, I made new enemies. Lord Pemberton's faction grew vocal in criticizing foreign influence on the crown. Prince Damien began hosting regular gatherings for plotting my downfall, and Queen Isabella's smiles grew colder with each passing day. The first direct attack came as scandal. I was returning from an evening walk when Sarah burst into my chambers, her face flushed with terror. "My lady, they're saying terrible things about you. Someone found letters in your room. Love letters supposedly written to a foreign prince. They're saying you're plotting to sell the kingdom's secrets." My blood turned to ice. The accusation was brilliantly crafted, specific enough to be believable, scandalous enough to spread quickly, and dangerous enough to justify extreme measures. Where are these alleged letters now? Lord Pemberton has them. He's demanding an immediate audience with the king. I forced myself to remain calm. "Send word to Captain Thorne immediately. Tell him to meet me in the old armoury." The old armoury provided perfect privacy for clandestine meetings. Captain Thorne was already there when I arrived, his expression grim. "How bad is it?" "I'm bad. Pemberton's gathered supporters and they're demanding immediate action. The letters are convincing forgeries. Whoever created them knows your handwriting well." "But not all people?" His smile was sharp. "I had Master Aldwyn examine them. There are subtle inconsistencies in ink and paper that suggest recent creation rather than correspondence conducted over months." I felt relief, but evidence of forgery might not be enough. In public opinion's court, accusation alone could be damaging. There's more. My sources say Pemberton has convinced Queen Isabella to support your arrest. She's arguing the accusations are too serious to ignore, which would effectively remove me from the game entirely. "What are your orders, my lady?" The question caught me off guard. I was still adjusting to people looking to me for leadership, that my decisions could affect not just my fate, but the lives of those who had chosen to follow me. "We need to get to the king before Pemberton does. If I can present our evidence of forgery first, we might turn this attack back on our enemies. And if we can't reach him in time..." I thought of the document hidden in my bodice, proof of my legitimate claim. It was a weapon I had hoped never to use, but if my enemies wanted to play for the highest stakes, I would match them. Then we prepare for war. We made our way through hidden passages that Captain Thorne knew from his years of service. As we approached the king's study, voices from within made us freeze. The king was not alone. "Cannot ignore such serious accusations," Queen Isabella was saying. "Regardless of your personal feelings, the evidence demands investigation." "Evidence that conveniently appeared just as she was establishing herself politically," the king replied. "Forgive me if I find the timing suspicious." "The timing is exactly what makes it so dangerous," Prince Damien added. "If she's truly working with foreign powers, every day we delay gives her more opportunity to do damage." I exchanged glances with Captain Thorne. The attack was already underway. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the frightened girl I had been months before. I straightened my shoulders, checked that documents were secure, and knocked firmly on the door. "Enter," came the king's voice, and I pushed open the door to face my accusers directly. The scene was exactly as I had imagined. King Aldrich sat behind his desk, expression carefully neutral but eyes blazing with suppressed fury. Queen Isabella and Prince Damien stood near the fireplace, wearing expressions of righteous concern. Lord Pemberton stood near the window, with papers that I assumed were the forged letters. "Your Majesty, I understand there are accusations that require my response." "Indeed there are," Queen Isabella said before the king could speak. "Lord Pemberton has presented evidence that you have been conducting treasonous correspondence with Prince Valdris of the Northlands." I turned to face Pemberton directly. "May I examine this evidence?" Pemberton hesitated, clearly not expecting such composure. Reluctantly, he handed over the papers. I examined them carefully, noting the details Master Aldwyn had taught me to look for. But more than that, the letters contained a fatal flaw that proved their creators had underestimated my intelligence. "These are interesting documents," I said finally, "though I'm puzzled by some contents. Tell me, my lord, how would I have obtained detailed information about our northern garrison's supplies that appears in the third letter?" Pemberton's smile widened. "That's exactly what makes these letters so damning." "Indeed. Which is why it's so puzzling that the information is completely wrong. The northern garrison has been supplied entirely by southern trade routes for 2 years. Not the eastern routes mentioned here. Anyone with actual access to military intelligence would know that. The silence was deafening. Pemberton's face went through confusion, realization, and finally, pale terror. Furthermore, I find it curious that these letters were allegedly hidden in my chambers, yet found so easily. One might almost think they were planted by someone who wanted them discovered. King Aldric's voice cut through the tension. Lord Pemberton, explain to me immediately how you came to search Lady Alara's private chambers without my express permission. The game was over, and everyone knew it. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my bodice and withdrew Master Aldwin's document, unrolling it with deliberate ceremony. Since we're discussing legitimacy and treason, perhaps it's time to address some other documents that have recently come to light. The king's eyes widened as he recognized the parchment. Queen Isabella took a step forward, her composure finally cracking. This, I said, is the marriage certificate of King Aldric Ravencrest and Lady Lyanna Ashworth, legally wed and witnessed according to all kingdom laws, which makes me not just the king's acknowledged daughter, but his legitimate heir with a claim to the throne that supersedes all others. The explosion of voices that followed was everything I had hoped for. Prince Damien's face went white. Queen Isabella began speaking rapidly in a foreign language. Lord Pemberton looked ready to faint. But through it all, King Aldric remained silent, watching me with such intense pride and approval that I felt my heart soar, despite the chaos around us. The game had changed again, and this time, I was holding all the winning pieces. The revelation sent shockwaves through the palace that could be felt for days. Whispered conversations died when I approached. Servants who had barely acknowledged my existence now bowed deeply. The very air vibrated with tension from a kingdom forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about succession. But with recognition came acute danger. As the legitimate heir, I was no longer just a political inconvenience. I was an existential threat to everyone who had built their futures around Prince Damien's eventual rule. King Aldric summoned me to his private chambers the morning after the confrontation. I found him standing before a map of the kingdom, his expression grave. The weight of years seemed to have settled more heavily on his shoulders overnight. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked without preamble, though his tone held no anger. "I've claimed what was rightfully mine, what should have been acknowledged years ago." He nodded slowly. "Yes. But in doing so, you've also painted a target on your back that will never disappear. There are foreign powers who have spent years cultivating relationships with Damien. Your existence threatens those carefully laid plans. Then, perhaps it's time for some new plans that put the kingdom's interests before foreign princes' ambitions." A smile ghosted across his features. "Spoken like a true Ravencrest. But words alone won't protect you. We need to move quickly to secure your position before your enemies can organize." Over the next hour, he outlined the challenges ahead with a general's precision. The northern lords were traditionally loyal but practical. The southern territories were wealthy but politically fractured. The eastern duchies were most dangerous, bordering 3 foreign kingdoms. Lord Pemberton was just the beginning, the king explained, marking territories with small flags. He has allies throughout the eastern regions, men who see opportunity in chaos and won't hesitate to invite foreign intervention. And Queen Isabella? His expression darkened. Isabella is cornered, which makes her extremely dangerous. She's spent 20 years building her power base, and your legitimacy threatens to sweep it all away. A knock interrupted us. Captain Thorne entered, his face grim with urgent news. "Your Majesty, my lady." Queen Isabella departed the palace an hour ago with a small escort, claiming she needed to visit her sister in the western provinces. But my sources indicate she's actually travelling east, toward the border. "To meet with her foreign contacts," King Aldric said tightly. "How long before she reaches them?" 3 days if she maintains current pace. Then we have 2 days to act before she can arrange whatever treachery she's planning. Over several hours, we planned a campaign that was part political manoeuvring, part intelligence operation, part preemptive strike against treason. Master Aldwin would investigate financial connections between nobles and foreign powers. Captain Thorne would deploy trusted men to monitor suspicious activities. And I would begin securing alliances among undecided nobles. But first, there was a more immediate concern. The court will expect some formal ceremony, the king explained. An official recognition of your status as heir. We'll frame it as a celebration of newly discovered family records. When? Tomorrow evening. The ceremony will make your status unquestionable in the eyes of law and custom. That afternoon, I met with the allies I had carefully cultivated. Each group brought their own concerns and capabilities, and I found myself naturally falling into the role of coordinator and leader. The ceremony will be beautiful, said Lady Margaret, a minor noble whose family had been overlooked for generations. But it will also paint you as a target for every ambitious lord with foreign connections. Then we make sure those lords understand the consequences of acting against the legitimate heir. Captain Thorne replied grimly. Violence should be our last resort. We need to win through legitimacy and popular support, not through fear. Popular support won't stop a poisoned blade, one of the guards muttered. No, but it will make any assassination attempt look like the treasonous act it is. Our enemies want to portray me as a foreign agent or usurper. We counter that by demonstrating I have support from loyal citizens at every level. As the meeting continued, I thought about how much I had changed since that night when Lady Cordelia had humiliated me. The frightened girl who had tried to disappear was gone, replaced by someone who could hold her own among ambitious and dangerous people. But the transformation wasn't complete yet. Tomorrow's ceremony would either cement my position as rightful heir or provide my enemies with the perfect opportunity to eliminate me entirely. As the sun set over palace walls, casting long shadows across courtyards where I had once walked as a servant, I felt destiny's weight settling on my shoulders like a crown. Tomorrow I would claim my birthright. Tonight, I would prepare for war. In my chambers that evening, as Sarah helped me prepare for what might be the most important day of my life, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. The uncertain girl was gone, replaced by a woman whose eyes held cold calculation, of a ruler and fierce determination of someone who had fought for every inch of ground claimed. Tomorrow would determine whether that transformation had been enough. The morning of the ceremony dawned grey and cold, with heavy clouds that pressed down on the palace like physical weight. I had barely slept, but when I rose, a strange calm settled over me. Today would determine my fate, and I was ready. Sarah had prepared me magnificently. The gown was royal blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught light with every movement. My hair incorporated small sapphires, stones that had belonged to my mother, but beneath the silken jewels I wore thin mail that Captain Thorne had procured. The weight reminded me with every breath that I was walking into danger. "You look like a queen," Sarah whispered. "Not yet, but perhaps by the end of this day." The great hall had been transformed, draped in royal colours and filled with every person of importance in the kingdom. Foreign ambassadors sat in places of honour, lending legitimacy while serving as witnesses. As I entered, conversations died to whispers, then complete silence. Every eye followed my progress toward the throne where King Aldrich waited. But it was the absence that caught my attention most forcefully. Queen Isabella's throne sat empty, a pointed reminder of the dangers surrounding us. Prince Damien was present, standing with young nobles, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. As I approached the throne, I felt history's weight settling around me like a mantle. King Aldrich rose, and his voice carried clearly through the hushed hall. "Lords and ladies of the realm, we gather today to correct an injustice that has stood too long. Legal documents were suppressed 20 years ago. Documents that prove the legitimacy of my daughter Ilara's birth and establish her rightful place in succession." Master Aldwin approached and unrolled the marriage certificate with hands that shook only slightly. The marriage of King Aldrich Ravencrest and Lady Lyanna Ashworth, properly witnessed and recorded according to all laws of the realm. Though the marriage was later annulled for reasons of state, the legitimacy of any children born during the legal union remains unaffected. The crowd erupted in whispers, but King Aldrich raised his hand for silence. "Lady Ilara Ravencrest, step forward and receive the acknowledgement that is your due." I climbed the steps to the dais, each one feeling like a mountain conquered. When I knelt before the throne, the king placed his hands on my shoulders, and I felt the connection between us, not just blood, but the passing of power from one generation to the next. In the sight of God, and witness of this court, the high priest intoned, I declare Lady Alara Ravencrest to be the legitimate daughter of His Majesty King Aldrich, with all rights and privileges pertaining to her royal blood. The words fell like hammer blows, reshaping the kingdom's political landscape. I was no longer the bastard daughter. I was the heir apparent, with a claim superseding all others. But even as I rose to face the assembly, I could see calculation already beginning in nobles' eyes. Some were shifting allegiances. Others looked as if they were planning funeral arrangements. Then the first sign of trouble appeared. A commotion near the doors drew everyone's attention. A messenger burst into the hall, falling to his knees before the throne. Your Majesty, urgent news from the eastern borders. Queen Isabella has met with Prince Valdris of the Northlands. They're demanding that Prince Damien be recognised as the only legitimate heir, claiming that Lady Alara is the product of foreign influence. The silence was deafening. Then Prince Damien stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Father, perhaps we should discuss these accusations privately, for the good of the kingdom. It was masterful manipulation, framing rebellion as concern for stability. But I had learned too much about power games to be caught off guard. Your Highness, I said, my voice carrying earned authority, these accusations seem remarkably convenient in their timing. One might almost think they were coordinated to coincide with today's ceremony. King Aldrich's expression was thunderous. Prince Damien, are you telling me that you support these foreign demands over your own father's judgment? The question hung like a blade. If Damien said yes, he would be committing treason before the entire court. If he said no, he would abandon allies who had promised to support his claim. I support whatever is best for the kingdom, he said finally, trying to find middle ground. And you believe foreign princes know what is best for our kingdom better than your own king? I pressed. I believe some threats to the realm require extraordinary measures. Threats like the legitimate heir claiming her birthright. Threats like foreign agents infiltrating the royal family. The accusation hung between us like a thrown gauntlet. All the careful maneuvering had led us to this inevitable confrontation. The kingdom would have to choose between the established order and the promise of something new. I turned to face the assembled court. Lords and ladies, you have heard the accusations and witnessed the evidence. You have seen foreign powers attempting to dictate our succession, and you have seen some among us willing to treat with our enemies rather than support their lawful king. The choice is simple. Will we be ruled by our own laws and traditions, or will we bow to demands of foreign princes who seek to weaken us? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Thorne and his guards stepped forward in support. Master Aldwin proclaimed the legal validity of my claim. One by one, the nobles I had cultivated began declaring their allegiance, their voices joining in a chorus that grew stronger with each proclamation. But not everyone was convinced. Lord Harwick stepped forward with his hand on his sword. This is madness. We cannot allow the kingdom to be torn apart by the ambitions of a bastard who... He never finished. Captain Thorne's blade was at his throat before the words were fully formed, and the message was clear. Treason would not be tolerated. King Aldrich rose from his throne, his voice carrying absolute authority. Let it be known throughout the realm that Lady Alara Ravencrest is my acknowledged heir, legitimate daughter of my blood, and future queen of this kingdom. Any who would dispute this claim are free to present their arguments to my judges. Any who would take up arms against the lawful succession will be treated as traitors to the crown. The ceremony that had begun as formal recognition had become something far more significant, a declaration of war against all who would challenge the legitimate order. As I looked out over the assembly, I saw the kingdom's future being decided in real time. As the ceremony concluded and the court began to disperse, I caught sight of Prince Damien watching me with such hatred that it took my breath away. The brother I had hoped might eventually accept me was gone, replaced by an enemy who would stop at nothing to claim what he believed was rightfully his. The war for the crown had begun in earnest, And I stood at the center of it all, no longer the frightened servant girl, but a queen in waiting who would fight for every inch of her inheritance. That night, as the palace settled into uneasy quiet, I stood at my window, looking out over the kingdom that would someday be mine to rule. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with enemies who would use any weapon to destroy me. But I had allies now, people who believed in the promise of something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new plots, new attempts to tear me down. But tonight, I was content to savor this moment of victory, when a bastard daughter became a queen in waiting, when justice triumphed over politics, when love proved stronger than fear. The Game of Thrones would continue, but I was no longer just playing it. I was winning it. And this was only the beginning. What an incredible journey we've shared through Elara's transformation from a despised servant to a rightful queen. Her story of resilience, political intrigue, and claiming her birthright against all odds shows us that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the darkest struggles. The way she navigated the dangerous waters of court politics, built her alliances, and ultimately stood up to claim what was rightfully hers is truly inspiring. If Elara's story moved you, if you felt the tension in every confrontation and the triumph in her victories, I'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more captivating tales of love, power, and transformation. Your support means the world and helps bring more amazing stories to life. Until next time, may you find the strength to claim your own crown.